I have always wanted a compost bin in the garden, but there are issues with small gardens and compost bins, especially when you consider it needs to be turned every few weeks. Not only does it need to perform, but it also needs to look well. Because this build is made from identical stages, it can be restacked in any order, making the turning of a compost bin possible in a small area. Now, if making compost is not your thing, this project can just be used as garden storage to house plant plots, bags of compost or other garden accessories. So stay with me for the next few minutes and I will give you a full tutorial of how I built this project. This entire project is going to be made out of softwood floorboarding. Now, probably softwood's not ideal for an outdoor element, but I'm going to give it a coat of preservative, and because it's a compost bin and going to be full of organic matter that's rotting down, then why not let the compost bin rot down with it? I don't know whether that's the right or the wrong way to look at it, but each stage is built from 2 layers of floorboarding. One of them I've cut the groove off and the other one I've cut the tongue off, so they'll fit together like that. Between the two, they actually measure 8.5 inch or 250 millimeters. There are 5 stages, which means the whole thing's going to be finished about 3 foot tall, 900 millimeters tall. As they sat on the angle, the inside dimension at the bottom has to be equivalent of the outside dimension at the top, so they actually slide on top of each other. The stage above sits down about 1.25 inches, so basically they lock on top of each other. The first thing I'm going to do is show you how I set it out, and then I'll give you some measurements. If you want to make one exactly the same size as I do, then the dimensions are here for you. If you want to make it slightly bigger or slightly smaller, then you can see the process. And hopefully if you can see the process, you can learn from that and understand how I've set it out. So I'll do it step by step, show you how to do it. In order to do this, we need a few tools. We need a square, a couple of pencils and a pencil sharpener. Start with a sharp pencil and of course the tape measure. So we'll start setting it out and I'll run through the math with you. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to draw a centre line across the sheet of my plywood, and then that line will be the reference for all the other subsequent dimensions and lines that I strike. Get a random straight edge, put that on there, and then I can just strike that. I'm making my compost bin 800 millimeters wide at the widest point, which is 31.5 inch. The first thing I need to do is just using that centre line is draw 2 more lines 400 millimeters each side of that. So that's my overall width, 800 millimeters, and then I'm going to use a piece of my timber and just mark the thickness of timber on there. Just put my 2 pieces of wood together, and then I'm going to mark the height of that on the board. So that's there, and that's there. So that's the height of my piece of wood. Just put that there in the middle. The stage that's above, so we've got ground, the stage at ground level, and then there's a next stage up, and because it's goes like that and I want it to drop on, I don't want obviously to drop all the way down to the floor, so I want it to drop about 1.1 inch down, 30 millimeters down. So I need to put another line 30 millimeters below the line that I've just drawn to denote that line. So that's 30 millimeter there and 30 millimeter line on, which is there. So this line here is the top, and this line here is the bottom of the next stage. So I know that the measurement at the bottom is 755 millimeters. So that means that my top, so 30 millimeters down, my top outside measure needs to be 755 millimeters. So I need to divide 755 millimeters by 2. It's 377 millimeters either side of that line. So that's the outside at the bottom, and this is the outside 30 millimeters down from the top. That's the outside there. My piece on the line there and the line there, and strike through. That is my angle. Top down 30 millimeters. That's the outside diameter. So I've got a piece of wood from there to there, from there to there. Strike that line, that's the outside line, and strike that line, that's the inside line. 5 millimeters inside that dimension at the bottom. 755 is also 755 is the outside dimension there. So basically that is the bottom stage marked out, or one of the stages marked out. So the next thing I need to do is add the stage above it, because then that just gives me some more reference points clearly. So I'll just mark them on now onto the sheet. So that now is the top and the size. The next stage it goes up will sit in this position here, and be there. Put that on that line there, draw around there, draw around there, and that there is the next stage. Now also what I can do is on the edge of the board is just to get another 30 mil there. There, and then just draw that on there. Basically now what I've got is the top of one stage, and another stage. So I'll just go over my pencil lines now in felt pen and write the dimensions in, and then you can see that easier on the video. And as I say, if you pause it or rewind it, and ideally rewind it because that means I get more views. But so that is the top of one stage, that's the bottom, and that's the other stage. Right, so maybe just to help me if I draw some nice little grain marks on. That there is the top of the stage, and this line here is the bottom of the stage above. I'll just put that in as a dotted line like that. This line here is the centre line. Dimension from there to there is 215 millimeters, or 8.5 inch. This dimension here is 30 millimeters, which is about 1.1 inch. The overall dimension on the outside is 800 millimeters. which is 31.5 inch. The inside measurement at the top is 740 millimeters, and then on that band that's 30 millimeters down, we've got that 755 millimeters, which is 29 3/4. 29 3/4. Yeah, I did say 3/4. And that is dimensions you need. The floorboarding is 21 millimeters or 7/8 if you need that dimension. So with my measurements in hand, I could take my stock over to the chop saw and cut them to a rough length. Okay, so this is all my components cut to length. In total is 40 pieces. There's 10 pieces of each length. And and just for you guys, I've written down the lengths here of the components I need. And also, if you note, I'll actually just put a dot, 2 dots, 3 dots, 4 dots on the end of the timber, and this is so when I put them through the secondary processors, I just know which piece is which for easy identification rather than measuring each piece to make sure which is which. So the next job now is just to groove off one side and the tongues off other. And to do this, I ran them through my record bandsaw. Okay, so that's the tongue groove pushed through the saw. Decided to use a bandsaw for a change. First of all, it's a little bit quieter than the circular saw, and secondly, it just doesn't create as much dust. So I've cut the tongue groove in a way that the groove is sat uppermost, so the tongue is sat up and the groove is sat down. That way any rainwater or moisture doesn't actually just sit in the groove, it actually is forced to run away. If I'd done it that way, then the water would have sat in the groove. So I was just careful when I cut them which pieces I cut the tongues off and which pieces I cut the grooves off. The next stage now is to actually take them back to the template, pair the pieces up and mark the angles on. Then I can take them back to the miter saw and actually cut the angles on for the final time, and then we're pretty much ready for assembly. So my first task was just to make a little template out of scrap timber. I offered this up to my marking out, struck the lines across, and then took it to the miter saw and cut the angle. The angle turned out to be 8 degrees. And once I had my 8 degrees set on the miter saw, I cut the angle on one end of all the pieces of timber, and then putting them in pairs, one end then looked like this. I set it to one end and fixed it with a clamp. And then using the markings on the sheet of plywood and the template, struck the lines across in the correct place. With this information, I could now set my stop on my miter saw and cut the whole thing to length with the correct angle. And then I repeated the whole process for the other 3 sizes of timber. Okay, so that's one of the stages cut out. Just keen to get one together to make sure it's right before I cut the angles on the other 4. I've also made a mark on the miter saw fence, so I know exactly where my stop needs to be when I cut the rest of them. So these are components number 1, these are components number 2. This is the base bit, so this is the bottom, and this is its pair. That should fit nicely on the template, and these are the longer of the pieces. So that is, yep, I'm happy with that. and then these pieces here are piece number 4 and number 3, which are the shorter internal sizes, so they should sit on that line and to that line. Yes, and they do. Perfect. What we should do is now is that and that should fit together in perfect harmony like that. So that's my next job, to put one together loose, so just to make sure that the dimensions work out and then work out where the little blocks need to be. Before I can put it together permanently, I need to run some wood preserver on these edges and on these edges. So using my new workbench outside the loft, these are all the components when they are cut. The inch by inch blocks was machined from scrap off camera. I decided where the tongue and grooves met just to put a little V-joint in with the block plane. I use a piece of cardboard to protect my new bench top, and then with the same cuprinol stain I stayed my garden shed and my obelisk with, I applied it into the grooves and the tongues. Now all the inaccessible joints are painted, I could now build up the first box. The cleats were inserted 30mm from the bottom using my combination square, and with a cleat on the corner and some holes drilled at the edge of the longer of the pieces, the box was screwed together. And once I was happy that it fitted together correctly and the size was correct, I just made up the other boxes. And that was the 4 boxes complete. Now it was time to turn my attention to the top box, which forms the roof. I built the bottom section up in the same way as I built the previous 4 boxes, but kept the top pieces loose. On the front I marked the centre line and then the thickness of another piece of wood, just transferring these lines down the front. And then at the end I marked up about 1 inch, and then using the 8-degree template just struck a line. Repeating the same 8-degree line at the other side. Using a straight edge I just marked a line between these 2 points and marking which piece was offcut. This formed the shape of the roof and was a 15-degree pitch. I could now set my track saw up to cut these angles, being careful to use a piece of old plywood to protect my new bench top. And that was the front and back section complete. Now I could mark the angles on the 2 sides. And then taking these back to the bench and cutting them blowing all the sawdust in my cup of tea at the same time. Now I just needed to nip back to the loft to complete the build. So first up I made an handle to go on the top, and then I cut some 9mm plywood that will form the roof. We are now into the final stages of construction. Just before I could fit all these pieces I just machined, I needed to make sure I applied preservative to all the raw edges and to the underside of the plywood roof, as it would be easy to do it now. The handle was fitted to the top, and then all the other pieces were drilled and then screwed in. And the plywood roof was fixed down. The bottom layer had a coat of preservative applied, and then a second, smaller piece of plywood was screwed down. My aim here was to replicate a tiled roof effect. The last thing to do was to apply preservative all the stages. In the end, the whole thing ended up with 3 coats. I hope you've enjoyed this project. If you have, please give me a thumbs up, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel for more projects. And if you wonder why I've not glued or filled any of the screw holes, I've now got to take this in pieces for transportation, as it's going to join my obelisk. As always, thank you for watching.